Welcome to Make Your Show The Creators. I'm John Kramer.
And I'm Jason Chichi.
We help anyone who wants to create an on-camera story to realize their vision every step of the way, from concept to writing to production to post-production.
In this podcast, we talk with creators who have done this themselves. We want these stories to inspire and educate anyone out there who is thinking of taking a shot at storytelling.
Today we're chatting with Greg Stuhr, an actor, writer, and producer who now makes sure to have several projects in the works at all times.
Besides hearing how he made his critically acclaimed first feature, The American Side, his tips on how to remain fed as a creative person are truly inspiring.
So, if you want to learn more about how he sold a pitch to a studio in the room, his experiences with film festivals and distribution, or how he made an ESPN 30 for 30 doc called Qualified, you'll like this episode. Hey, Greg, thanks for joining us. We're so glad you could make it today to chat with us.
Hey, John and Jason, thanks for having me.
We talked a little bit about this obviously before, but so you guys go way back. You guys knew each other as actors initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think I met Jason as I feel like I thought of you as a writer, but I know you act. Actually, I earlier was watching the scene, the Facebook scene between the two of you, which I loved that scene.
Between me and John.
Oh, for Me's with me.
Yeah. That is a great scene.
Thank you.
And it's so perfectly understated. I thought it was a fabulous scene.
Thank you.
Whoever's watching, go watch that scene. It's good stuff. Good performances and good writing.
So how did you start acting, Greg? I mean, were you since you were a kid?
I mean, I always liked, I was one of those guys who just, like to making a joke and getting a laugh and that kind of silly thing. And so, I did a couple little student show things, but it really wasn't until late in high school where I did have the director of our high school play say, you could do this. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, oh man, I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe I could, but I thought the more reasonable thing, which probably wasn't reasonable at all, would be to go into like sports broadcasting. I was going to go to Syracuse and I was going to, someday I would be the color commentator for, CBS football or something like that. So, but my brother went into communications, and there was one of those things where I don't do the same thing my brother's doing. So I very naively auditioned for two schools, not realizing how hard it would be to get into them. And I thought, well, what's the backup plan? There was no backup plan. So I auditioned for two schools and thankfully got in. And that's really where I fell in love with acting. It really wasn't probably until my sophomore year that I really started to understand what it was. Because at that point, I just thought I loved old movies, and like I said, like getting a laugh or whatever. So I would just do bad impersonations of like Jack Lemmon, and it was just, that was what I thought performing was, and then at school, thankfully, it was pretty intense, and you kind of broke down and learned, oh, there's a whole other way to approach this, and that process kind of surprised me, and I kind of learned to love it.
So you're an actor in New York. And you're grinding and having really some, success. And, I think you can attribute that to hard work. You can attribute that to your relationships, probably.
Yeah, relationships and luck, I think.
And luck, sure.
Yeah. One thing I will say that I did that was really helpful, and I don't want to leave this part out, because if I talk about those two things, Keith and the Bride, it makes it sound like, well, some things happened pretty quickly. They didn't. After a couple of years here of nothing really happening other than, one acts at EST and things like that, I'll tell you what I did. I was invited up to Buffalo, which is where I'm from, by the folks at the Irish Classical Theater up there, who would all come over from the Abbey, and they got green cards or visas, whatever it is, to work, to teach at the University of Buffalo. And they invited me up to do a play up there, and that kind of changed things for me, because now I felt, okay, I'm back to being an actor. The plays, I got the shows they would pick, no one was ever going to ask me to do in New York. I was doing Pinter and Shaw and you name it, and it was fabulous. So I did that on and off for 5 or 6 years, where I'd go up and do a show a year up there, which kind of kept me going. They weren't going to change my career, but they definitely fed me artistically, not to sound corny, but it was important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is absolutely crucial. And again, I think it's a recurring theme that we hear when we talk to people who make their own work is uh, a lot of times how they're surprised at how artistically fulfilling it is, and how
Yeah.
they maybe even think of themselves again as more than just an actor and as an artist. And I guess that would lead us into to the question about how did you first start thinking about making your own work? Because I'm unlike you guys, did not go to school for acting. I had a very different road into acting, and I would say I started in midlife, so not that long ago. And when I did, people were already talking about how actors need to make their own work, and I'm imagining that that wasn't the case for either of you when you started, and probably for a while it maybe was a message that started later in your career. But what was it that inspired you to start thinking about making your own
Yeah,
show?
I mean, I have to say there were a few people in my life, including Jason, who were already hyphenates, and that was not something that I'd sort of entertained, but I was
Mhm.
kind of witnessing it with like Mitchell and Katie and you, Jason, and I was seeing people do that. And the things I knew I wanted to do, I always loved film. Um, and I assumed that I would somehow, I even love directing film, which I haven't really done yet. But in my head, I thought, well, I'm going to start to work in film at some point, of course, and then I will learn all about directing film. I'm going, I guess, to the Clint Eastwood School of Film Directing, and eventually then I will direct films. This was in my head, what I actually thought would happen. And at a certain point, at a certain age, I thought, that's not really happening. So I started, I was intimidated by the thought of directing anything film-wise. So I started writing. I thought, well, if I wrote a script and then I partnered with somebody who was, had a director's vision and head in mind, and we were on the same page, then maybe I could get something made. So I started writing, and I think the writing came out of the fact that I worked, when you're coming up as an actor, and even in school, you work so much with playwrights, with new plays. I mean, that's where actors starting out, that's so often where you end up, workshops. So you're watching the process constantly. So I watched all these writers go through the process, and then you would have a dialogue with them. I mean, some of them were very open to wanting to get feedback, and you start to understand the process that way. And I realized I felt like, and I seemed to be getting the response, that I was good at fixing things, or I was good at least giving ideas that could lead to fixing things. And that made me think, well, I could maybe write something terrible and then fix it. I didn't think I could write something good, but I thought, well, if I just get something down on paper, and we all know this is the hardest thing, just get it down to begin with, because then you can go back and fix it. So I started writing this, epic sort of film that it encapsulated pretty much everything that I loved. It was a neo-noir, and it was twisty and a mystery, and dark, and hopefully a little funny, and it was just 160 pages of just my brain and every movie that I loved sort of mushed together. And I was doing a play in New York, and a friend of mine who was a lighting designer was the TD for a private school on the Upper West Side, and she would have me come up during the day and focus lights, because of course Carnegie Mellon, one of my big jobs early on was to get on the fly floor or get up on the ladder and focus lights. So I knew how to do that. So I would go focus lights for her at the show. And there was a woman there by the name of Jenna Ricker, as you know, who was teaching and doing costume design there. And she was in the process of making her first film called Ben's Plan, which is a great indie film that she did everything on, with great actors that some of whom she met through her connections with the Atlantic Theater Company, and it was just wonderful. And I was so impressed with that. And she and I just started talking, and she was in the process of developing another script, and we talked about that, and we just hit it off. And I thought, oh, this could be a person who I might want to collaborate with. Yeah. So that's how the American side came about. The little upshot to that is that we got a script that Jenna had initially developed and that I worked with her on into the IFP, which is now Gotham, I think, the film market here in New York. And we got in there. It was our first script we'd heard, and we thought, wow, we got in there. So we met with all these different production companies, and you could tell that they liked us and they liked the material, but they were a little iffy about the script. It was pretty dark. And they were like, well, what else do you have? So I started talking about the American side. And we walked out of there saying, well, now I guess we have to go finish that. So at one point I turned over the 160-page manuscript, and Jenna said, let's make some cuts. and eventually we got it down to—
How long a process was that?
I mean, this was over a few years. I mean, one of the great things that Jenna had us do was to go up to Buffalo and create a proof of concept trailer. And her visual take on the city had such an impact on the script, because there were things she was capturing that weren't in the script that we just visually fell in love with. And then she just knew how to capture in such a beautiful way that just added to the neo-noir vibe of it all, that I would go back to the typewriter and incorporate scenes that had some of these visuals. And I mean, a really backwards way to write something, but it was sort of fun. And not unlike, I came to learn later that a lot of great writers and directors did do that kind of thing. I mean, Hitchcock notoriously would pick a location and say, now, what could the scene be? And we did a little bit of that with this. And then, we got that film to a point where, or the script to a point where we thought, well, we can start showing it to people. And we were looking for, just trying to get a budget, actually. And that's how we ended up finding our producer, because we were showing it around trying to get a budget. And we found someone who had experience in line producing, who said, well, I haven't done any producing, full producing, so I'd like to be involved in that. And then one of the things we learned in the process, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself from the question, but one of the things that was really helpful to us, and that's an example of, is we brought in people who had great reputations, but who we were giving an opportunity a step higher than what they'd been doing. So someone who had been a second AD, we're saying, this is your opportunity to be an AD on a film, and this obviously created a great opportunity for Jenna to direct something with a slightly bigger budget, and with obviously a certainly bigger crew. But we did that across the board. And even with our actors, and we ended up with a pretty extraordinary cast for the American side.
It's true.
And that was, again, just roll up your sleeves, research, literally reading interviews with actors, reading articles about actors, researching what they were up to say, here's a perfect example. Robert Vaughn. All right, we wanted somebody who connected us to older films and had some of those kinds of films like Bullet in his repertoire. And we narrowed the list down to about 4 or 5 actors of that era who were still around and still working. And I discovered that he was doing a tour of 12 Angry Men in England. And I thought, here's a guy who wants to be working. Here's a guy who just loves it and wants to keep working. So we wrote him a letter, and he immediately responded. Absolutely. I mean, it's things like that and all of our actors, most of them had theater backgrounds. We knew they were kind of roll up your sleeves actors, and we were very strategic about the schedule, because of the nature of the story. My character is kind of constantly opening doors in this rogues gallery kind of maze of characters, and so it allowed for different actors to come in for short periods of time and then not be necessarily needed again, because I was in every scene, but they could pop in and out. So the commitment for these actors was not long for most of them, and that helped too, because Robert Forster would say, yeah, I can be there for 4 days. Sure.
It's such
you
a
know?
great lesson to teach. I mean, I've experienced it as well, where, we always advocate, first of all, people writing for, if you have a location, or if you're inspired by a location and it's, something that maybe you don't have to, pull permits for, and it's in your back pocket, write something that takes place there. And as far as casting, if you're thinking of someone like that, maybe what's that person up to? And I always say actors like to act. So
Yep.
if you have a connection, or if you find their agent or whatever it is and write them a letter with the script attached, hey, and if they like it, and if it's like you said, they just had to come in for a day or two.
That's
uh,
right.
I crafted a whole series that way for Katie Huffman, who
Absolutely. That's a
I
perfect
knew that
example.
I knew
Yeah.
that she knew all these wonderful actors, but I knew they weren't going to be available for a 12-day shoot necessarily. So that's how the script became. That's how I built it, because then people would come in and out, and maybe we'd get them for a day or two at the
Right.
most. But you can still get them there.
You can get them, and it helps your show pop, you know?
Absolutely.
I mean, Katie's fabulous, but it's nice to see her interplay with all these wonderful other actors, you know?
Right.
How did you know how to do all that? Did you guys just luck out? Did you ask for help, advice from other people? How did you learn how to do these amazing things?
I have to say, John, the whole process was intimidating, and it still is to me. And yet we had the time of our lives doing it, but it was like going to a different specialty in film school each step of the way. Like pre-production, I knew what intimidated me was the whole process. That I thought, how on earth does someone actually make a film, let alone get it into theaters? I mean, I didn't know any of that.
How'd you guys figure that out?
So it was a very long process, and it was asking questions, and some of it was research and learning and making mistakes. You know, I look back, there's lots of things we should have done differently, but I don't, I don't hold that against us, because, you can't cover everything. I mean, you can't know it all at once. And I have a feeling, there's never going to be a moment where you know everything. So, it was slow. Each step of we would say, okay, we've got this part done. We understand what the budget is. Okay, good. Now what's next? Can we find, the next big step was attachments. Who can we get attached to this? That will allow us to raise some money. So we got 3 actors to attach themselves to the project. And as you guys know, all that means doesn't mean they're definitely doing it. It means that they've read the material. They have a respect for the material. If they're available, they would do it, kind of thing. And we got Matthew Broderick, who I knew from the play. And of course, that carried a fair amount of weight with it. But again, that's just through, we happen to do a play together. So if anything, it pays to be friendly and nice and a decent person to all the people you're working with.
Absolutely.
Because those people will help you out in a pinch.
Yeah. So
we
you had
learned
time.
all along the way. We got the attachments, and of course, raising the money took a couple of years. I mean, it just, and then and the budget got lower and lower because we really wanted to make it. We're like, well, this initial budget we're not going to reach that and get to shoot this anytime soon. So how can we make it a lower budget? Yeah. And eventually we got it to a place, and we started to put a crew together, and then everything happens all at once when the schedules are aligning. That was the other thing, we're like, when is this going to happen, and how do we get everything to work? And it just feels like it's going to be all too drawn out. And then suddenly everybody's schedule lines up, and you immediately have to go into, get the office up in Buffalo and get the pre-production rolling and get the locations nailed down. And it just all rushes together. And then you're sort of shocked that you're suddenly on a set, and it's your set, and it's there are trucks, and you're like, how did this happen? And there's times where I still don't know how it happened, but the process was very, and then of course that's just some of it. There's, now what, which is a part of it that we didn't understand that well at all. We thought, we have all these.
Now what is post-production?
It's funny, even, during all this, we're also trying to do our other things. And I remember I was up at Yale Rep doing a play, and when rehearsals would end, I would come back to my apartment up there, and I was cutting together the opening credit sequence on iMovie, and just pulling pictures of Buffalo that different folks up there had taken, these beautiful different shots of Buffalo and historical pictures of the falls and Tesla, who's part of the plot. It was just supposed to be a temp for festivals. And then by the time we were finished, our producer was like, "Why don't we just use this? This is so." So if you look at the credits closely, I'm the expert credit sequence creator, which of course I know absolutely nothing about, and just tediously figured out on iMovie. And we didn't even know if the transfer would work, because I was doing it on iMovie. We didn't even know if if that would work on a big screen, how that would work, but it worked fine. So
we've talked. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, we've talked to people who, after they've made their things, they say, "God, I really wish I'd thought more about the distribution of the thing before we made it." How did that process happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, again, I think we had a concept in our head of how it would work, and it just didn't work that way. I think we thought, well, we've got this wonderful actors, we've got a genre picture that's kind of quirky. It just seems like, wow, what festival wouldn't want to? Well, apparently not too many. And part of that we've come to learn, just because we've had friends who get into festivals, and there's, as you guys know, there's a lot of behind the scenes relationships that need to be massaged for the festival kind of thing to work. Prior relationships to these festivals, having producers intimately connected to them, having actors whose agencies are really championing the film, and leveraging other projects to get smaller projects into festivals. I mean, there's a lot of that happens, and we didn't have any of that. We just thought, well, it'll stand on its own. And thankfully, there were a couple of festivals, including Woodstock, that did take a chance on it, and that was nice, because I'll tell you what happened at Woodstock. Also, I would just side note on festival, you go through this phase of like, well, I don't want it to go to this festival because Sundance won't take it if it's already been in this festival. And for me, the lesson on this was, any festival that wants to, let them have it, and let people see your film and get it out there. What happened at Woodstock for us that was great was that the Hollywood Reporter reviewed it. So that gave us our first kind of stamp of approval from a national publication. And it was a good review. And that allowed us to get a little more traction with getting it shown in New York. And then what happened, again, it was really a roll up your sleeves. This is why I like talking to you guys, because it's just there's nothing slick or super connected about it. Jen and I literally got on the phone and called art house theaters across the country. We had a friend in this that we'd gotten to know, just Jenna met watching a Buffalo Bills game at another dear friend who you may have read about, Bill Thompson, who just recently passed away. Also, he worked for Cohen Media and lots of places in the distribution area. And Bill was wonderful in sort of letting us know how distribution worked in the indie film arena. And I would have never thought of this, but he suggested this. He said, call. A lot of these places are going to have booking agents that they adhere to, and they won't even consider talking to you, which we found a lot of. I mean, I literally called people and they're like, no. And then you would get some of the more independent minded places, and they would say, well, we'll take a look at it. And I'd send them the film, and in some cases they would get back to us. I mean, I remember the Wilmette just outside of Chicago, and this is one of the big success stories for the film, is the Wilmette. So I called them, and totally independently run. The woman who runs it, fabulous. And I had said to her, would you guys consider like doing just a weekend of this? And she said, no, we want it for a week. I was like, great. Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you. She said, would you guys be willing to come up, do a Q&A for opening night, you and Jenna? Absolutely. So we go up and do the Q&A, and the theater itself helped arrange for a couple of radio interviews and publications to come see it. We spent a very small amount of money on PR up there, very little, but enough to really just to get press to come. And we opened there, and we were up against indie films that you know the names of. I mean, there were that year, it was just, there were, you know, it was with much splashier, slicker campaigns, and we outperformed them. And so they kept us for a second week, and then a third week, and a fourth week, and a fifth week.
Wow.
Meanwhile, we were traveling around the country doing openings in other cities, you know, in San Francisco and Portland and LA. And we would go back every, you know, not every week, but we went back maybe two or three more times for Q&As there. And the independent film critics up there, 5 or 6 of them, they have a whole group. For whatever reason, they just, maybe because it was Buffalo, and Buffalo is like a little tiny Chicago, they really embraced it. And we got great reviews out of Chicago, and that helped us, because again, it's a slow process. So you take the great reviews from Chicago, and then you call San Francisco and you say, look, this is what they're saying in Chicago.
Is that how you booked those subsequent cities then? You used the Chicago thing? You didn't have necessarily connections in those places?
No connections in those places. No connections in any of these places, really, other than, you know, just finding theaters that were independent and willing to take on films they'd never heard of. I mean, part of it was that we were showing up, that carried a lot of weight with them, because a lot of the art houses, they love feeling a connection to the films that are playing.
Yeah. So
if they feel like, oh, we're going to get a chance to give feedback and talk to the creators, the art houses love that. It's part of the I think the attraction for subscribers to those art houses, that they're much more connected.
Is this on your dime? I mean, is this part of the built-in budget for the film, or are you?
No, that's actually one mistake, you know, that you mentioned, like what, I mean, I can't say it was a mistake, because we needed every cent to make the film, but we did not reserve, you know, I think people suggest very conservatively 10%, but it probably should be more than that. And certainly studios are known for spending more than the film itself to promote it, because that's business. That's what's more important, is promotion. So we had nothing to promote the film. So Jenna and I did a Kickstarter campaign. Mm-hmm. I think probably still exists. You could probably still go see elements of it on the site, because I think you can go back and look at old campaigns. But that worked really well for us, and that was our budget for. That was our P&A budget, you know, prints and advertising. What they call prints and advertising, but it's not really prints and advertising anymore. But that's what we used to get the PR in Chicago. It allowed us to travel to these different cities to do the Q&As. You know, there's just a few incidentals along the way that helped to pay for.
And where can you see the film today?
So today, the film, we ended up, we played at these art houses across the country. We got, I'm trying to remember how the sequence worked. We got, the reviews were very, very nice. I mean, look, sometimes I look at this film and I think there are so many things to criticize about this film. I was prepared for, this thing to just be shredded. So the positive reviews, I still look back and I'm like, wow. I mean, I'm just impressed that either they got what we were doing or trying to do, or they found something in it that, I don't know. I can't explain it. But anyway, the critics, so Rotten Tomatoes, it's like 80% critics and audience, which is nice for a little indie film. And we'd pretty much milked the theatrical run as much as we could. So there's not much money to be made in the theatrical run at our level, little art houses, a week here, a week there. We're not making much on ticket sales, even if it's full. It's not significant. Keeps you going, but it's not a lot. So the big thing for us was, okay, can we get a digital distributor? And I think we reached out to a couple different places, and eventually the Orchard showed interest. Now the Orchard is now the Orchard started out in music distribution and then in film, but now they've switched. They're a different company now. But anyway, they took it on. Sony was interested in the DVD. Like, we were like, who does DVDs anymore? But Sony wanted to create DVDs. And so the DVDs were like Barnes and Noble, and we were in Redbox. But then the first big thing we had was we were on Netflix. I think it was it Netflix or Amazon? Netflix. So we ran on Netflix, and we also ran on pay-per-view, which we did really well on pay-per-view. And then we were on Netflix for a while. So now, I mean, the film is several years old now. It's available. I believe you can get it on Amazon. I think at this point it's probably even on Tubi. I think it's available there. Certainly Amazon, you can get it. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, it was a crazy.
What a journey.
And it feels like it's still going in a weird way. And of course, like I said, we'd like to be doing more. I mean, we actually made this film a while ago, but the process, the film came out in 2016. So even that's a while ago at this point. But it was such a rewarding process, super challenging, of course, but really rewarding. And the real lesson I walk away from is what you guys are always preaching is to just do it and don't worry about what you don't know, because what I don't know could fill, a stadium.
And you have a film at the end of it.
At the end of it, you have a film, and that carries some weight. But here's the other thing: we also thought, again, naively, well, now that we've got this film out there, someone's going to see it with some. I'll be cast in the next, CSI, and, Jen will be directing this and that. And we thought this is well, here we are, Rotten Tomatoes, great reviews, all these critics, and it didn't fling open doors. It didn't, what it did was it expanded our circle a bit. It taught us how to make a film. And as I said, we've made a couple things since. And we have these connections, but it didn't, the part of it that changed our lives was the fun of doing it, the process of doing it. That's what changed our lives, not how the business treated us afterwards or the result of it,
That's an amazing message. I was going to ask the two kind of big questions that I had were, and we've alluded to it a little bit. What was the one thing that, if you could just pick one, I know it's hard, but one thing you would do differently next time, or you would have done differently if you could have, I guess, on that first project, because it sounds like you've gone ahead and made more. It didn't scar you so much that you didn't make any more films after this.
Right.
And then the other question is, you had this intention when you started out writing that film. How did the experience of making the film fulfill or not fulfill that intention? So what's one thing you would do differently next, that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think having having an understanding of the distribution side of it, having something in place, both financially for the prints and advertising element, but also the connections, like sowing the seeds earlier in the process, trying to get some buzz going at certain festivals, or find some inroads at certain festivals, or get someone attached to the film who has inroads at certain festivals. I mean, it just raises your profile so significantly to be, and it doesn't have to be Sundance, but there are certain festivals that are going to give you a leg up as far as getting attention. And there are great smaller festivals that aren't slick, and thank God they're not super slick. I mean, I love what they do at Woodstock. That is a fabulous festival. If you can get your film in there, you're very lucky. It's not going to have the big players descending on it like some of these other festivals.
Yeah.
And not that we
I had a short there. They were very receptive and
absolutely.
It's a really nice festival.
And it's a great town, and the whole vibe there is fantastic. I mean, we'd love to go back to Woodstock. Yeah, I think that would be one thing, like really thinking about that and planning that. And it's not going to be a guarantee, but having some inroads made on that festival scene, even as you're ramping up production, would be a lesson.
Do you think that there was a way that you could have learned how to do that better besides just going through the process?
Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe we had to go through it, because again, we weren't anybody. We didn't have, it wasn't like, I mean, we're still not anybody, you know what I mean? It's not like we didn't have any cachet with anyone to say, hey, we've got this film, we're going to Woodstock. Yeah, you and 8 billion other people, I mean, so I think now, not that we have more of that, but I think we can be smarter about it. And we wouldn't have, there's just no way to get there without having gone through it, I don't think,
Yeah, so where you started when you started writing the script so many years ago,
all right,
what you envisioned,
yeah,
versus where you are now, how did it meet or not meet those expectations? Do you have completely different goals now and ideas of what you want to do?
It's such a great question, and I guess the answer for me is that it fluctuates wildly from moment to moment, because there are times where I look back at it and, I think about, not to harp on the critics, but it's very rewarding to have people you don't know, have no connection to, who do this for a living, look at something that you helped create and say, yeah, that's worth watching, and then there's also the self-critic to me that looks up every blogger, in a basement everywhere, who says things like, this was the worst movie I've ever seen. It's a good thing Greg Stuhr wrote it, because no one would cast him in it otherwise. He's awful. Where did he come from? You read that stuff too, and it's just like, oh, okay. So that's another good lesson. You start to develop thick skin, because you're acting as a producer too, so you kind of have to read everything. Yeah. It's not just an actor who can go like, I don't want to know. I mean, I always read everything anyway. You shouldn't, but I do. So I think that was the other big factor I will say, John, is the thing that for me helps me overcome the fear of it all and the intimidating elements of it all, is having like-minded partners. Because on the days where I'm, just thinking, what on earth are we doing? To have a partner or two or three that can say, no, today we're doing this, or we're getting this done, or you got to feel good about this, or here's the next step, put it in perspective for you. And then hopefully you're doing the same for them when they're having days where it's like, oh gosh, we cannot get ahead. Why is no one saying yes to this? Why aren't theaters booking us? So you have to having other people. So it's not just you alone, makes a big difference, makes a huge difference.
It's such a collaborative process.
Yes.
Anyway. So that is everything. It's so true. So what are you working on now?
Probably the biggest thing we've done subsequently actually was a documentary. Ended up being an ESPN 30 for 30, and it premiered at South by Southwest. Jenna directed it as well, and I produced it. It was about Janet Guthrie, who's the first woman to race in the Indy 500 in 1977, and also the Daytona 500. And one of the things we've been working on is the development of the narrative of that.
You writing the script?
Yeah, and our script is, you know, based on her book, which the other one is not. Her autobiography is fabulous, and it's what got us interested to begin with. But again, we were not. This is another lesson for us. It's like we were not seeking out documentary, that world at all. It just so happened that we became interested in this story, and we had a few sort of tenuous connections to that world that we thought, well, let's pitch them this, and that kind of snowballed into making it happen. Now, interesting that that's opened doors in that arena, because once you've made something like that, then people think, you know, okay, that's what you do. So there's other. I mean, it's so funny how with the paths, how those paths go.
How many projects would you say you've got in the works right now, if you could put a number on it?
I don't know. I'm going to ask you guys the same question, because I know it's going to be a lot, right? Because we always feel like we have like a bunch going.
Well,
You know, it's funny because, you know, between Jason and I, you know, we've got things that we're working on our own, we're working on with other people,
exactly,
working on together, you know, the two of us. It feels like there can never be enough in a way.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and on the other hand, like you said, there's something about that relationship. I think creativity just leads to creativity. It's something that I don't know. I'm sure somebody else already said it, but it's not a resource that you have to worry about using too much of. It's a self-replicating resource somehow. It's very strange. So, you know, if anybody talks to us about creativity, that's just something we say, that you know, there's no such thing as writer's block on one hand too, as you proved. It's just about being willing to write bad stuff. And that internal critic that you've suffered through at Q&As, you somehow silenced long enough to write a feature film.
Yeah, and you have to kind of hang up the, like, you know, perfectionism hat and all that, because it's you know, it's much. I always say this. Anyone who asks, it's like, it's so much easier to rewrite than write, but you can't rewrite nothing. So you have to get it on the page, and let it be what it is, and then go back and then make it great. You know, because that you can do. You know, you can do that. What we have to convince ourselves is to get the ink on that page to begin with.
Is there anything else that you would like to ask Greg before we do our first kind of formal wrap up?
So much more interesting and in depth about so many parts of what you did than I anticipated. So
good.
Is there anything else you want to offer, Greg?
I will say, I'm remembering what I was going to say that you made me think of, John. It's about, you know, you talk about how many projects you have going and all that. And I think what's interesting about that is you don't know, and why it's probably good to have multiple things going is, like we learned, you don't know what is going to gain traction with someone, and you don't know in any given moment who you're going to be introduced to that might be interested in this or that, which is why, part of the reason why, I mean, these are all things we're passionate about, but it's part of the reason why Jenna and I have 3 or 4 television projects, film projects together, a couple things separately, including plays, including unscripted series. So as I said about the doc, we didn't know that was the direction that we would head in, but that's what got traction, and that was the opportunity that presented itself. So we embraced it, and I do think, Qualified, that's the name of the 30 for 30. I think it's a really good film. And we don't know what's next. The next thing might be an unscripted series, not something, you know, wasn't my dream, but if that's the next thing, that's the next thing, and we'll embrace it and have fun with it and make it the best thing we can make of it. ultimately, I certainly want to get back to narrative features, and we're working at that. But television is also, extremely appealing for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is financial, if you can crack that code. So yeah, it's whatever you got to have different things going, because you don't know what's going to get traction. You don't know what your connections are going to lead you to, or ask of you at any given moment. Hey, do you have this? Look, I think, again, I'm going off here, but the series that I mentioned earlier that I'd written, that came about because the playwright whose play I was doing in at Yale Rep and LA and New York, and I'd worked with a few times, he had an overall deal with a television studio, and part of his overall deal was to bring them projects of other people's at certain times. And he, we got on very well, and he liked me enough and knew that I liked writing. And he said, why don't you write something, and I'll see if, maybe if it's worth going into them with. And he told me what he ostensibly wanted it to be about. And I said, well, okay, I get why you like that, but to me, that's not that interesting. But there's an element of that is really interesting. And let me go research that a little bit more, because there are people I know really well and have been around. And it's an environment I've been around a lot. And so I did a little bit of that and started developing this script, or this pitch. So we went out and pitched it. And I've never been in that room sort of situation before, where you're pitching to a network and they bought it, which is insane. We walked out and he said to me, do you know what just happened? And I was kind of like, it seems like they like it, right? He's like, yeah, they bought it.
Bought it in the room.
Bought it in the room. Only pitch I've ever had to a network.
That's some really
not a happy
beginner's luck.
Yeah, it's serious. It's absolutely. It is 100% luck. And I'll tell you how lucky we were. The two people that we pitched to, one of them had just recently had an experience that dealt exactly with this scenario. And the other one, who was very young, really, really savvy, had just been watching a series, an old TV series that we reference in this, that I thought, even when we walked in there, I was like, oh, these people are not going to know what we're talking about. We are like old school to them. And they had just been watching, and they're like, oh, I get it. It's this. And we're like, yeah, it's that. So we got super, super lucky. Where we didn't get lucky is, this was, I guess I can say, but I won't say. This is with a certain studio, but this studio got bought. It's a huge studio. You can probably figure out what it is. And it got bought by another huge studio. And the people that signed on to ours were gone. And so it just like that. So it was not a happy ending, but it was a great experience. But the point of the story is, you don't know what is going to be asked of you next. So having different things in your mind and on the page is always worthwhile.
Sure.
Greg, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. It was a lot of fun.
It was a blast. Thank you both.
It's great to catch up with you, Greg. My friend. It's so nice to see you.
Well, it's a neat thing you guys are doing, and I think it's so valuable, and it's stuff that I think even people who are out there creating, they need to go back and look at your stuff and be reminded. I know I do. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, do it.
Oh, thank you. That means so much coming from you. Thank you.
No, but it's true. It's true. We need that out there, Absolutely.
That means a lot. Thanks, Greg.
Take care, Greg.
All right. Thank you, guys. Great
Thanks,
seeing
Greg.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That chat had so much great advice in it for people who are making things for the first time.
Although it can be intimidating, do your research, ask questions, and learn from your mistakes.
Be flexible. Embrace the opportunities that are presented to you.
If you want to check out other episodes we've done, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts, on our YouTube channel, or check out our website, makeyourshow.tv.
Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure to keep a lookout for more episodes just like this one.